Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 21st annual lecture series, Crowley Lecture Series of the Museum of Newport Irish History. I'm Mike Slein. I'm the past president of the museum. I served in that capacity from 2014 to 2022. And last year, I turned the reins over to the very capable and lovely Deanna Conheeny. Tonight's presentation is made possible through the generosity of Frank Furtado, given in memory of his wife, Barbara Carr Furtado. And I know that many of you know Frank. He keeps in touch often, and he asked to be remembered to each and everyone in the audience. He now resides in Oklahoma, but as you can see, stays well connected to the Museum of Newport Irish History. Now, what qualifies me to stand before you? All of the other prior presenters have been college professors, historians. They have written books. They have suffixes after their name, PhD, EDD. I have none of those. I've never written a book. I've never been asked to. But what qualifies me is that I have a deep and abiding love of Ireland, its culture, its history, its music, its scenery, and above all, its people. And that's been honed by approximately or no less than 20 journeys to Ireland over the past 40 years, most of them extended stays ranging from weeks, in some cases to a couple months. I also have an equally abiding love of our city of Newport. And tonight, what we're going to focus on here is connections between the two, connections between the land of Ireland, connections between Newport County, and some other places in the United States. If you'll focus on the two maps here, first of all, the one on your left, take a look at Northern Ireland. Focus on the two markers in the north of Ireland. They tell two very distinct stories. The one in County Tyrone, from Clogher County, Tyrone, came the mining magnate James Fair, who emigrated to Galena, Illinois at the age of 12, and then went on to become a very wealthy mine owner out west. Go southeast of there to County Armagh and Down, and you have Newry, right on the border of those two counties in the north. And that is where Captain Christopher Perry of the very famous Perry family, the naval dynasty, was imprisoned during the Revolutionary War. And that is where he met his wife, Sarah, at the age of 16, and brought her back to the United States, specifically brought her back to Peacedale, Rhode Island, and then later at the turn of the century in Newport, where they owned a home at the corner of Walnut and 2nd Street. If you focus to the southwest of Ireland, on the Beara Peninsula, we have Allihies, a mining town. And the miners from Allihies, as copper was winding down, and as the famine started to take hold in that area and diminish the number of miners, the call went out for miners in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. And we ended up having the first large migration of groups of Irish came to Portsmouth, Rhode Island to mine the Portsmouth coal mines. We'll talk about that a little bit later. To the southeast of there, or to the east of there, we have Kinsale, Ireland, our sister city, Newport's sister city. And the last topic that I'll cover tonight is the reasons for the twinning between Newport, Rhode Island, and Kinsale. The reason I'm standing here tonight is the 3 walking tours that you see on the slides here now. My last project before turning the reins over to Deanna Conheeny was to publish the 3 walking tours of Irish Newport. And each one of those highlights between 12 and 15 different stops along the way. And we'll add more as you folks report to me and give me topics that you think are worthy to include. We'll update it yearly. But 12 to 15 stops, each one is about 1 hour to an hour and a half long. And the goals, my goals are 2 tonight, and that's really to broaden your aperture to the contributions of the Irish and other ethnic groups as you stroll through the streets of Newport. And number 2 is to maintain the tours as living documents. And I mentioned this, and I put a phone number here, as well as the website. If you see new worthy sites that you believe should be included on our walking tours of Newport, please let us know, and we'll make sure that that happens. Now, the first topic that I'm going to cover tonight is what I will call the Fifth Ward super achiever, and that's Florence Kerins Murray. A judge, she was the first woman Supreme Court Justice in Rhode Island. She was born and brought up in the Fifth Ward on Narragansett Avenue, and interestingly enough, spent her life in Newport, Rhode Island. And why do I have her as the first topic? She certainly is not chronologically. To quote from a video that we have at the Interpretive Center, Florence Kerins Murray so easily and simply says, "It is suggested in a reliable study by the University of Rhode Island that migrants seek out relatives who can give them support and tend to go to that place where the climate is the same as that from where they derived, because it's easier to find similar work. And the people who came from County Clare to Newport came here because it is a summer resort like Lisdoon Verner, where my people came from. And it had many opportunities for employment. I think her reasoning applies to many or most of the stories of immigration. They gravitate toward relatives, a like climate, and similar work. And Justice Florence Kerins Murray, I think, encapsulated most of the stories that we're going to present here tonight. She was a most accomplished individual. Some of the highlights from her career are listed here. She was the first woman Rhode Island Supreme Court Justice. She lived her entire life, as I mentioned, in the Fifth Ward. And now we'll talk about the journey. Her grandparents emigrated from Lisdoon Verner, County Clare, around 1880. And for those of you that haven't been there, I'll just try and describe the area to you. It's a beautiful, beautiful area in the Burren district near the musical capital of Ireland, Doolin, where the boats leave for the Aran Island and the Cliffs of Moher. The Burren limestone covered landscape is truly beautiful with the wildflowers in the spring. It's really a must-see destination in the springtime. The town has a full-time residence occupation of 700 folks today, yet it has 30 or more hotels because it's a real destination for its mineral spring spa and all the tourists that come for that reason. Another rather unique attraction is that for 160 years, Lisdoon Verner has held a Matchmakers Festival. And that's a time in September for about 5 weeks, where after the harvest is done, the men come from the farmers' fields to join the vacationing women in search of their soulmates. And Willie Davis, a world-famous matchmaker, says if you place your hand on his matchmaker book, you'll be married within 6 months. So if we have any interested parties out there, you know where to head next September. Recall what Judge Murray said about immigrating to an area with similar climates and work. Her family arrived in the 1880s. Her grandparents lived at 565 Thames Street near Harrington Street. She lived right around the corner. She grew up at 18 Narragansett Ave, which is stops 8 on the 201, around the corner from the Interpretive Center. She walked about 200 feet or so to Carey Street School, which is in the center of the view graph that you're looking at. That was her grammar school, and then slightly longer walk to Rogers High School in the center of Newport. She was a stellar student, not a surprise to anyone, and the Rogers High School yearbook predicted that Flo Cairns will teach English in a college of note, and up for dean, she'll get our vote. She chose Syracuse University as her college of choice, and there she really truly flourished. She was a class officer all 4 years. She was the editor of both the newspaper and the college magazine, the Syracusan. She graduated from Boston University Law School in 1942 as the war raged on in Europe. She was the sole woman in her class, and she graduated number 14 in a class of 133. So you can see she is really on the march. When she passed the bar exam in Massachusetts in October of that year, she did so in uniform. She had already joined the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, and in that role, she commanded the 3rd Women's Service, which comprised 20,000 women in the Army. She finished her living days in Newport at 2K Street, where she had a law library. It's now a B&B called Hilltop. And let me flash back here for a second. It's the lower right-hand picture on that graphic. I think probably the capstone of her entire career may be well that the law building, the courthouse in downtown Newport, was named after her, the Florence Carey Murray Judicial Center that overlooks Washington Square. Some of her accomplishments are listed here, and it's really it's truly the sign of a most accomplished person throughout her entire life, and ended up being the sole woman Rhode Island Supreme Court Justice from 1979 to 1996. The next topic that I'd like to cover here is the mining families and their contribution to Newport society. And this is a very interesting, almost a dichotomy here, that the Interpretive Center highlights the working class families on the island at the Portsmouth coal mines, while the walking tour highlights some of the buildings that the wealthy miners constructed here and their contribution to the upper Newport society. We have 3 topics when we're talking about Irish miners. The first one is the working class Irish at the Portsmouth coal mines that are highlighted at the Interpretive Center. The second one is the unsinkable Molly Brown and her saga that led from Hannibal, Missouri to Leadville, Colorado to Newport County. And thirdly, the James Fair family odyssey from Clower County, Tyrone to Illinois, and then to the Comstock Lode in Nevada and to Rosecliff on Bellevue Avenue. When we talk about the Irish miners, they truly permeated Newport society. On Bellevue Ave, we have stop number 3, which is Molly Brown's home, Monetui, or where it used to be, and stop number 10, Tessie Fair's Rosecliff. The mining family shaped Newport culture as well as high society in the 19th and the early 20th century. The Portsmouth mining colony was one factor in bringing the Catholic Church here to Newport at Barney Street and Mount Vernon Street in 1828. When Bishop Fenwick visited Newport, and he visited both the Portsmouth coal mines and the Fort Adams construction site, and saw the large number of Irish families that wanted a place of worship. And the miners arrived here in 1810, and they resided here until 1910. So that was 100 straight years of mining the Portsmouth coal mines. They hailed from Allihies in County Cork on the Beara Peninsula. There were copper mines there, there were coal mines here, but the mining skill set is transportable. And here we didn't have miners, so the call went out for miners, and the Irish came and they answered the call. Some came to Portsmouth, and others, larger numbers, actually went to Butte, Montana from Allihies. The mines in Portsmouth were operated initially by the Rhode Island Coal Company, then the Aquidneck Coal Company, and lastly by the Kaiser Aluminum Company, where they fabricated wire in Portsmouth. And those are the towers that were visible for years before they became the condominiums of the Carnegie Abbey Golf Course and Resort area. And just an interesting footnote to here is that underground here, the mines still hold an estimated 400 million gallons of pure fresh water. Okay, the flip side to the working class miners are the mine owners that entered Newport society. And we'll first talk about the unsinkable Molly Brown depicted here. Molly was born Margaret Tobin in Hannibal, Missouri, from a very poor and very religious Irish Catholic family on the shores of the Mississippi River. And what's interesting about her name is she was initially known as the unsinkable Mrs. Brown after the Titanic sinking in 1912, and later added the name Molly after the play of the 1960s. Okay, born and brought up in Hannibal. Hannibal was an interesting area in that it was a rail depot, and it was also on the Gold Rush transit route to the mines out west. It had good rail access. And here she was living there at 18 years old. She had been working since 13 years old. And at 18, she relocated to Leadville, Colorado, in search of a better life with her brother Daniel. She was a store clerk there in Leadville. She also served the miners at soup kitchens. And there she met James Joseph Brown, she called him JJ, Irish Catholic, also the son of Irish immigrants, who had moved there from Waymart, Pennsylvania, again in a mine area near Scranton. And JJ was a self-taught geologist who educated himself through book learning. He was as poor as Maggie. And I found in reading about Margaret Tobin or Maggie, I think she was smart beyond her formal educated years. She was a fairly eloquent writer, and she wrote in a letter, and this is at 18 years old, "I wanted to marry rich, but JJ was the best man I ever met." And she said, "I'm better off with a poor man whom I loved than a rich man whose wealth attracted me. So I married Jim." And that was when she married him at age 19. He was 20 years old. And he was as poor as she was at the time, but his poverty issue was solved within the year. His self-taught mining engineering expertise earned him a large stock dividend in 1893 from the Little Johnny mines that are depicted here on the slide. They bought a large Victorian house in Denver, and the house is still there and is now known as the Molly Brown House and Museum. She became first a philanthropist and pseudo-socialite, and I say pseudo-socialite. She never quite reached the top rung of society, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we're talking about Newport. She was a charter member of the Denver Women's Club, and with that new wealth, she sent her children to Paris to study. So I think she was way ahead of her years when you look at her age and the moves that she made later on in life. She separated from JJ in 1909. They never divorced. And as you'll see later on, they ended up being buried together in their final days. They never divorced because they were Irish Catholic, both of them. And with her large monthly allotment, she traveled the world and donated large sums of money to charity, which concerned both of her children later on in life. They felt that she was giving away their legacy. Now, while visiting Paris with John Jacob Astor IV, and she, again, liked her JJs, visiting Paris, she departed for home on the RMS Titanic, and the rest is history. And as you know, JJ never made it, and she earned a nickname for her legendary heroics on the rescue, in the rescue boats of the Titanic. Now, the Newport connection. In 1914, she came to Newport to chair an international women's conference. And it was an instant love affair with Newport, and Newport then became her home away from home. She bought a large cottage, which is depicted here on the slide, at number 40 Bellevue Avenue, and it's adjacent to number 38 Bellevue Ave, which is the Wenchinger King Hotel, that beautiful yellow building with the white trim at the corner of Catherine Street and Bellevue Ave. And she actually purchased two cottages next to there to house her guests. The Newport Herald at the time reported that she entertained lavishly and she entertained often. She never really entered, I mentioned earlier, her socialite status. She never really entered the status of the triumvirate, the Alva Vanderbilts, the Mamie Fisher, or the Tessie Fair Ulrichs. She was more proud of her philanthropy. And the Newport Herald described her as the best dressed woman in Newport. And again, look at the slide and you be the judge. She was certainly one of the most unique figures in Newport. And folks were drawn to her by the fascination of having a woman that, from the mines in the Wild West here in Newport society. Her whole life, she had been an aspiring actress. And in her 60s, she moved to New York City to appear on Broadway, and she died shortly thereafter at age 65 in her sleep. On a happier note, she was buried with JJ in Westbury, New York Cemetery and the Holyrood Cemetery. Just a footnote, if you go into Wikipedia and you look up all these different people, they list where they were born, what year, where they died, what year, and their occupation. And her occupation was listed as socialite. She's not alone. You'll hear more about Tessie Fair Ulrichs in a minute. Now, here's the James Fair Odyssey. We talked about on the very first slide, emigrating from Tyrone, from County Tyrone, Cloward County Tyrone, to Galena, Illinois. And then later on, he was 12 years old at that time. Later on at age 20, he moved from Galena, Illinois to the Comstock Lode in Nevada, where he purchased stock in the mines and became very quickly very wealthy. He was one of 4 owners of the Comstock Lode, along with 3 other Irishmen, John McKay, and 2 San Francisco pub owners, James Flood and William O'Brien. And in 1869, they formed the Bonanza firm. To show you what true wealth was in those days, he gave each one of his daughters, and that would be Tessie and Bertie, gave each one $1 million, which would be the equivalent today of $33 million. So here we have 2 20-year-old women walking around with $33 million in their pockets, and they're out husband hunting. The other interesting or ironic thing is he was not invited to their weddings after giving them $1 million apiece. They came from a very dysfunctional family where his wife, former wife, had custody of the 4 kids due to his habitual adultery was the charge. He died in 1894, leaving a fortune to his 2 girls. And his fortune was, his net worth was $45 million, equivalent to about $1.6 billion in today's conversion. At that time, in 1894, it was 4% of the gross national product of the country was his legacy. So Tessie and Bertie then came to Newport, wanted to enter Newport society, and renovated Rosecliff in 1899 using architect Stanford White. Tessie married the German ship magnate Hermann Ulrichs in 1890. And then her coup, she considered this her coup. She arranged for her sister Bertie's marriage to the recently divorced William K. Vanderbilt just down the street at the Marble House. And as many of you know, William K.'s former wife, Alva, moved just down the road to Belcourt Castle and marry Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont. They certainly don't believe in the keep it simple, stupid formula, do they? In 1902, the sisters built the Fairmont Hotel, named after their father, James Fair, in San Francisco, and sold it in 1906, just days before it was basically destroyed by the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. So they certainly sleep on a bed of 4-leaf clovers. Tessie and the Triumvirate ruled American high society in Newport, in New York City, after Mrs. Astor retired. Her wake and her funeral were held at Rosecliff in the Golden Blue Room, and Tessie was laid to rest at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, New York. The last short story here is a most interesting one, and that is the Perry family. Truly, if there ever was a naval dynasty, it was the Perrys of Newport, Rhode Island. And we seldom mention seafaring and the Irish in the same breath, the same sentence, when we speak of Irish history. But remember that Newport is a seafaring town. And at the time of this immigration, it was one of the 5 largest ports in the United States, along with New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Charleston. Every school kid in America, somewhere in their grammar school years, knows the name Oliver Hazard Perry and his brother. Well, 90%, this was a very telling figure. 90% of the people in Japan know who Matthew Perry is from their history books. Very important figure in their history. Their father was Captain Christopher Raymond Perry, born in 1761 in Wakefield, specifically Peacedale, from a prominent English family, and his father was a surgeon. His mother, Sarah Wallace Alexandra, was a native of Newry, County Down, and we'll get to that in just a minute. I touched on it earlier. They married and they lived in Rocky Brook Village in Peacedale, Wakefield. They had 5 sons and 3 daughters. This is a remarkable statistic. All 5 of the sons died while in the naval service to their country, not from combat, but being in the naval service at the time of their passing. And Oliver Hazard Perry, born in 1785, was the oldest of the sons. His statue is in Toro Park, right across from the Elks Lodge. Matthew was 9 years his junior, and he lived in the family home at the corner of Walnut and 2nd Street, 31 Walnut. His statue is erected in Washington Square, interestingly enough, right in front of the Florence Kerens Murray Judicial Complex. Now, the father, Christopher Raymond, joined the Continental Navy in 1789 and commanded several frigates as a privateer. The last being the frigate General Greene, who was the famous Warwick, Rhode Island general from the Carolina campaign. Captain Perry's son, Oliver Hazard Perry, was a midshipman on board Greene at 13 years of age. Talk about grooming your sons early on. Well, Captain Perry was captured by the British off the coast of England, and he was imprisoned by the British at Newry Barracks in County Down, right on the border with County Armagh. And it's just north of Dundalk in County Louth, an ancient Irish city, midway between Belfast and Dublin. Newry today is a pretty and thriving market town, a population of 28,000. And although in the north, it's 90% Catholic Irish. So Christopher Raymond met his wife, Sarah, there and escaped with her at age 15, masquerading as a British seaman and bound for Rhode Island via the Virgin Islands on his vessel, the Favorite. He married Sarah the next year, 16 years old, and Oliver Hazard Perry was born 1 year later. And as many or most of you know, Oliver Hazard Perry was the commander of the Great Lakes Naval Forces, and at that time he was only 27 years of age. He fought 9 campaigns on Lake Erie during the War of 1812, and he was truly a combatant poet. He's well known for his poetic lines as well as his combat expertise when he said, "We have met the enemy and they are ours. If victory is to be regained, I will regain it," as he defeated the British naval forces under Robert Barclay. And very interestingly is that was the first time in history that a British squadron ever surrendered to anyone. Now, his younger brother by 9 years, Commodore Matthew Perry, raised at 31 Walnut Street in the Knowles Perry House. And I encourage everyone here to do a drive-by in the Point District to take a look at that house. It's depicted here on this slide in the bottom right-hand corner. Very beautiful colonial home of that era. Commodore Matthew was a key agent, if not the key agent, in opening Japan trade routes with the United States. He's also memorialized by a monument in Yokosuka, Japan, and that monument is adjacent to a museum, and the upper 2 photos here on this slide show the monument in Yokosuka, Japan, and on the right are his black ships paintings that are in the museum in Japan. The museum is at Perry Park, on the spot where he set foot on July 14th, 1853, and delivered a personal letter from President Millard Fillmore before he set sail shortly thereafterward. Both brothers have ships named after them. How many families can say that? There's the Perry class frigate and a Lewis and Clark dry cargo ship named after Matthew. And both are buried in the family plot and Island Cemetery in Newport. The last topic I'm going to cover today is more of current events, and that's an event that happens each year as we celebrate our twinning with Kinsale County, Cork, and Newport City, County, Newport here. And it's almost the perfect twinning cities. If you look at geography, sites, culture, depicted in the upper left here, you can see in Newport, Fort Adams. In Kinsale, we have Charles Fort and James Fort. The difference being that Fort Adams has never fired a shot in anger, and the forts in Kinsale have been occupied by first the Spanish, and second of all, the English, the Williamites, until it was turned back over to Ireland in a treaty of 1922. The two cathedrals in Newport, St. Mary's, and in Kinsale, St. John the Baptist, celebrate St. Patrick's Day each year. And Father Mark at St. Mary's recognized the mayor of Cork this year, Gillian Coughlin. When we were in Kinsale at St. John the Baptist, the priest there, Father Robert, recognized the Newport contingent at the blessing of the Shamrocks, which is a very, very meaningful celebration where they bless the Shamrocks on the altar, and after Mass, people come up and pin them on their lapels as they go about the day. The streets in both towns are very similar. We have Thames Street. Kinsale has Main Street. We have Castle Hill Light at the entrance to the harbor, and they have the old headlight at the foot of the world famous golf course, the old head of Kinsale. This last slide really spells out the close ties between Kinsale, their residents, and the United States. And specifically, this is the Ring Finnan Garden of Remembrance, which was founded and instituted by a New York City nurse who was from Kinsale, and her name is Kathleen Kate Murphy. She was an emergency room nurse in New York City and so overcome with emotion after 9/11 because of the 343 firemen that entered the towers that did not return. And she knew a great many of those. She was a close personal friend of Chaplain Michael Judge, who was from County Leitrim and who was victim number one on 9/11 as he was wheeled across the street to a chapel and laid on a pew. She was so moved by that day that she returned to Kinsale to her farm and planted 343 trees. And on each of those trees is a plaque with the name of the fireman and the company to which they were assigned. And it's just a very, very touching memorial, and touching from the standpoint of the meaning of a person in Kinsale, Ireland, and her love of the American firefighters and first responders from her working city, New York City. I'll just mention that the one tree that's pictured on the bottom right is that of a former museum member, Bill Day. That was his brother, James Edward Day, who was killed on that day as a fireman on a ladder company in New York. Now, what about today's immigrants? We talked earlier about the mission, and I'll just close with saying the mission is to celebrate the contributions of the Irish to Newport County from colonial area to the present. And when we look at today, the remarks that are left in town, We have 3 restaurateurs. At the Fastnet Pub, we have Finbar Butch Murray. And the Fastnet is named after a sail turning point. He was a sailor out of Skull, Ireland, Butch was. And Fastnet Lighthouse is a turning point off of Clare Island in West Cork. We have Malt Restaurant that's owned by Tommy and Shaylin Sheehan from Dublin. And the Corner Cafe, owned by Mary O'Donoghue from Dublin. So the Irish immigrants of today are leaving their mark as well on Newport. And I would like to close with that and thank you all for joining us tonight and look forward to seeing you at next year's Crowley Lecture Series. Thank you.